It was a royal rumble amongst the Democrat candidates in Nevada last night. We'll break down all of the most important moments for you. Also, the Nevada caucuses are just a few days away. How's this Democrat primary shaking out? And how long is Roger Stone going to prison? We'll have that for you and much more coming up.
Health care for all, educational opportunity for all.
Senator, thank you. Mayor Bloomberg, would you like to,
that works
the
for
question
all,
was about
not just
socialism.
Mr.
What a
Bloomberg.
wonderful country we have. The best-known socialist in the country happens to be a millionaire with 3 houses. What I miss here?
Well, you'll miss that I work in Washington, House 1.
That's the first problem.
Live in Burlington, House 2.
That's good.
And like thousands of other Vermonters, I do have a summer camp. Forgive me for that. Where is your home? Which tax haven do you have your home?
New York City, thank you very much.
Yeah, right.
And I pay
Yeah, also
all
have a
my
home.
taxes. And I'm happy to do it because I get something for it.
New York City, getting a shout out last night. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Man, the debate was spicy. It was a spicy meatball. I enjoyed it. And I wasn't expecting to. So you got to give the Democrats credit. At least they put on a show. And I think the ABC News anchors, I will tell you, I find Lester Holt to be, and I mean this as a high compliment, among the very least annoying lib anchors in all of the news business. I mean, I'm not even sure I find him annoying, quite honestly, at all. So that's, which is, is a big compliment. I think he did a good job. I mean, Chuck Todd's very annoying. He was there too. But yeah, it was quite a throwdown. And that we started off with, that soundbite was the single most interesting exchange for me of the night. Now, everyone brings their own biases to this. And when you talk about who you thought had the best night, and look, Bloomberg did not have a good night. Didn't have a good night. There's no question. Okay. But Bloomberg also would probably stand right next to me. And if we could, and we asked him the question, what do you think about last night? He said, who cares? In a week, all people will remember is the ad that they're seeing, not just on TV, on their smartphone, in their Facebook account, on Twitter, in their email box, from people talking about how great Bloomberg is. So does the debate last night really matter? We'll see if there's a big shift in the polls. I don't think it will change all that much for Bloomberg. I mean, there were 2 people on the stage last night who were really battling it out for supremacy in terms of attention. Biden was I'm just going to yell. I did the Obamacare and I did this and I'm just yelling and I forget where I am, but I know if I keep raising my voice, then people might listen. That was Biden. I just, as I've said, a third-tier politician with a fourth-tier mind. I also think that Bloomberg's best line, where else have you heard Bernie Sanders, socialist with 3 houses, before? I'm not saying Mr. Mayor listens to this show frequently, but I'm not saying he doesn't either. I don't know. Can neither confirm nor deny, and I really mean that. I have absolutely no idea. But it was quite an exchange. So the big takeaways, the most fun thing to do after these debates, and I didn't do one because, quite honestly, I watched the whole debate this morning. I had something to do last night. So I watched the whole thing this morning, which was great because I was, sitting there drinking my coffee and I didn't want to get any preconceived notions going. So I didn't see what anyone had said about the debate. And as I watched the whole thing through, I saw that if I were to come up with some live tweets or if I were to give you the pithy Freedom Hut style, what you need to know, Sanders got hit hard for being a socialist that's out of step with most of the country, but he still has a political army behind him. Bloomberg, it was exactly what we expected, but he did get in a good shot on Bernie Sanders. But the stuff with the women and the non-disclosure agreements, we'll get into all the specifics of this, didn't look good for him. But again, I think it doesn't matter. I think the people that like Bloomberg won't care. Klobuchar comes across as more reasonable and more normal than really all the other Democrats on the stage, at least to me. And that continued last night, although she mixed it up with Mayor Pete on some stuff. Mayor Pete was getting feisty with her. And then you had Elizabeth Warren. And I saw the jokes on Twitter about how, she brought a tomahawk to a knife fight or that she had her war paint on. I mean, people were, when the president calls a political candidate Pocahontas, I mean, I think the field is wide open for the continuation of those kinds of jokes. I think it's worth noting those are jokes at Elizabeth Warren's expense, not at the expense of Native American people. But it's amazing to see how predictable it was for her to go after people the way that she did, notably Mike Bloomberg. You see, she had in her head going into this debate that if she was on offense against Bloomberg, it would elevate her back to being at some degree of perception parity with Sanders, who is the class warfare guy. Sanders is the class warfare guy. Elizabeth Warren tried to be the more policy wonk, also into the class warfare stuff, but she's taken a slightly less aggressive approach. And last night, that all went out the window. She was going after Bloomberg with everything she's got. Klobuchar was going after Sanders on getting rid of health care for 149 million people with his Medicare for All plan. Buttigieg was going after Bernie Sanders on $30 trillion of spending, only $15 trillion of which has been explained. And thankfully, we were spared from having Tom Steyer up there like, climate change is I only wear one tie to lower the CO2 emissions from making ties. That was what was going on last night. All right, let's dig into a bit of this, shall we? I mean, the big takeaway is that I think that this is now it's a Bernie Bloomberg fight for this nomination. I think that's the case. Maybe we'll see after Super Tuesday that Biden all of a sudden surges, but I think this is a Democratic Party that has to choose, and they're choosing between polar opposites within the party, which is what's so fascinating. These aren't two people. Usually, I think you would expect that at a particular political moment, there'd be two people who, in a primary, were really running in the same lane with mostly the same policy ideas. And what you have with Bloomberg and Bernie getting all these Bs, Buttigieg, there's too many Bs in this race. It's a good thing Buck isn't in the mix. But then I'd have to take them all to school in that debate stage. But you have these different candidates, and they are far apart on these issues. So far apart that you have to wonder if Bloomberg, under other circumstances, would even really be considered a Democrat, or if he's really more of an independent who's trying to run as a Democrat in order to prevent the victory of Donald Trump. So now let's get to it. This is where, let's start with this one, because the person who went after Bloomberg the hardest, no question, was Elizabeth Warren. Warren was setting the ambush from the very beginning. And here is how she started. This was early in the debate, too. Here is how she started out. Play 5.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. Democrats are not going to win if we have a nominee who has a history of hiding his tax returns, of harassing women, and of supporting racist policies like redlining and stop and frisk. Look, I'll support whoever the Democratic nominee is, but understand this. Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another.
Whoa, the range is hot. Rounds getting fired. It's, whew. Elizabeth Warren deciding that she was just going to go after Bloomberg and say that he's not really much better than Trump. That's certainly the implication. She more or less came out and said it. Those things that she rattled off that she believes will prevent the Democratic Party from winning, let's understand, if you take a longer view, if you look at this from a strategic perspective, redlining, his comments about women, and stop and frisk, those are all problems for the Democrat base. I don't think any of those are going to be major issues of concern in the states that, if Bloomberg were the winner of the primary, he would be facing off against Trump in, right? Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, and whatever else you want to throw in there. I mean, those main states that you have to look at as the determining factor in who's going to be the next president of the United States. I don't know if any of that really matters. You could say that, minority turnout in those states might be a little bit suppressed for Bloomberg, but minority turnout in those states is generally not, it depends on which state we're talking about, but and which minority group. So that remains to be seen. I just don't think that any of those issues would stop a Democrat voter from coming out and voting for Mike Bloomberg. I could be wrong. We are seeing now that there's still major concerns among the Democratic establishment that Bernie Sanders is out of the national mainstream. He's not out of the Democratic Party mainstream, clearly, but is he out of the national mainstream? Do independents, do undecided voters turn out for a Bernie Sanders radical socialist agenda? That's the pivotal question. That's what has to be answered by these Democrats, and I don't think they're ready for that. Let me go back to Bloomberg for a second. And I hate Bloomberg's policies, but I do think that we need to understand who's a bigger threat to the American economy and way of life among the Democrats. And I believe that Bernie Sanders is it's obvious that he's a much more serious threat to many of the things that are important to us. So if I ever sound like I'm being a little too favorable to Bloomberg, full disclosure, that I worked for the NYPD when Bloomberg was the mayor and that he was relatively well regarded in that role. And he was a Republican then. But I also think that Bloomberg on climate change and on guns, and there's a whole host of issues where he is terrible. He's not like a little bit bad. He's not a moderate. He's a leftist on those issues. So I like to give you that context for everything else I'm going to say, because I'm kind of going to be one of these people. Right now, everyone's, when they're pulling apart this primary, they either are bashing Bloomberg and de facto pumping up Bernie a little bit, or bashing Bernie and pumping up Bloomberg a little bit. I mean, even if that's not the intent, that's the side effect. So I'm aware that may be what's going on there. And by the way, please, everyone, I love all of you who listen to this show, and I am humbled and honored, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart every day. I don't know how many times I could say this, though. I have no control over Bloomberg buying ads on our podcast. iHeart does not. The company takes political advertisements, and if you take political advertisements, which if you're a major media company, you have to, you can't discriminate against different political parties. So please, I love you all, but I keep getting, producer Mark has to feel that we keep getting these emails like, why is Bloomberg buying? We can't stop him. And I would argue that we should be able to, that these campaign finance laws are ridiculous in a lot of ways. But I just wanted to say that there's nothing that we can do right now about it. All right, with all that, this is where things got rough for him. And he looked like he was up there on stage, and he's just like, do I have to be here? Can I pay someone else to be here instead of me? I'm so bored. I don't want to be here. I'm tired. I'm worth like $100 bajillion. Like what? So here is where he got himself into a tough spot up on that stage. Play one, Mark.
And the mayor comes along and his attorney say, I will give you this amount of money if you promise you'll never say anything. That's how it works.
Mayor Bloomberg's final word to you.
I said we're not going to get to end these agreements because they were made consensually, and they have every right to expect that they will stay private.
If they want to release it, they should be able to release themselves.
Can I add a word to
Say
this?
yes.
No, the mayor, I shouldn't. By the way, I'm somebody who doesn't like the retention of titles thing, so I shouldn't. I just go with Mayor Pete because his last name is hard to say, like everybody else. It's not out of some strange newfound respect for Pete Buttigieg. But Bloomberg, he is not Mayor Bloomberg anymore. Bloomberg did not do himself any favors there. But what is he really going to say? I don't know what the NDAs that were signed. I don't know what the provisions are in them and who's involved. And it might be people that sued Bloomberg's company for what other managers did. And so that then would be, he's not in a position to just waive it. But no one cares about that. All they care about is that Bloomberg has NDAs from his company where he has apparently a history of not always speaking very well in front of women and about women. And the Democrats must at some level be aware that all their complaints about how horrible Trump is when it comes to women, that's not going to be as effective a line of attack if, in fact, you have a Bloomberg nominee from the Democratic Party. One thing that's interesting, Bernie Sanders, he's been married a few times. His personal life somehow never gets brought up in any of this either. I think that reached the point now where divorces and messy divorces and those things for political office, nobody really cares. Kids with one wife and then kids with another wife, or kids without a wife, or whatever it may be. I think that people are increasingly just don't really make decisions based on that. I think that's what we're seeing. But Bernie Sanders' personal life somehow always no one brings it up. They did bring up his medical records last night and his promise that he'd release them, which he has gone back on. But really, the entire MO last night for Warren and for Bernie, and probably for a couple of the other candidates, you want to throw them in there too, was to just stop this Bloomberg momentum, this juggernaut of financial political onslaught. And here is what Warren called for. Play two.
I hope that Michael Bloomberg decides to live by what he says. He just wants to see the Democrats beat Donald Trump. So that's great. Mike Bloomberg, drop out of the race. Keep putting your money in to help Democrats beat Donald Trump, and just take your ego out of this.
Did you expect him to do differently tonight or better than he did?
Well, what shocks me is he seems so unprepared for the question about the non-disclosure agreements. I mean, think about what that says about Mike Bloomberg, that all these years he has been sued evidently multiple times for discrimination against women and for harassing women. The details, we don't know, because each time it happens, he puts a chunk of money on the table and then forces the woman to agree to wear a muzzle for the rest of her life over this issue.
Well, that was the main attack against Bloomberg last night, and it didn't look good, and Bloomberg had a bad night, all in all, on the debate stage, but I still hold to I don't think anyone's going to care. We'll see if I'm right in the polls. All right, so that was the big moments. The big moments last night were about the attacks, about different candidates on that stage going on offense against each other. I think that, by the way, I think that that's fine. I don't understand why people keep saying they should focus on Trump. We all know they hate Trump and think that he's the Antichrist, and they're all we get that. That doesn't tell us anything. What do they think about each other, and how are they different from each other? And if you're going to ask for the most powerful job in the world and the nuclear codes, you should be able to take people coming at you on stage in front of millions and millions of audience. I mean, conservative pundits deal with that all the time.
Sleepy Joe Biden the other day had 68 people. And now they have a new member of the crew, Mini Mike. No boxes. We call him no boxes. And I hear he's getting pounded tonight. You know he's in a debate. I hear they're pounding him. He spent $500 million so far. And I think he has 15 points. It just came out. Hey, fake news. How many points does he have right now? 15?
Yeah, I love when he calls out the fake news in the back of the room. You know why? Because it makes them so mad. Even they have no sense of humor about it at all. They have no sense of self-deprecation in the corporate liberal news media. They get very touchy about it. So I think that was pretty fantastic when he does it. But look, you look at the most recent polling, and Sanders is at the top. Biden still is doing well, although not well enough maybe to be the nominee. And Bloomberg has bought himself into this very key spot, this key position. What Warren said, that she wants his cash to be used to help the Democrats, I could see that happening. And that's been my concern all along. Imagine let's say a Sanders Klobuchar ticket, which I think would be a very wise ticket for the Democrats from just their perspective of trying to win and beat Trump. I think Sanders Klobuchar would make a lot of sense if Bernie is the nominee, and then with Bloomberg's checkbook behind it, with some kind of a promise, maybe it's behind closed doors between Bernie and Bloomberg, that Bernie won't go full Bernie, but I don't think Bernie would make that promise. So I don't know. I think that Bloomberg has stepped into this race more to defeat Bernie Sanders than to defeat Donald Trump. That's my belief. Now, he can't say that because it would look like he's a Republican Trojan horse going into the Democratic primary. I think it's more important to Mike Bloomberg that Bernie Sanders is not the Democrat nominee than that Donald Trump is not president for 4 more years. And I think that's pretty sound analysis from him. I do not find that I do not find that to be off at all. Obviously, I share that. If that is in fact the way Bloomberg feels, I think that he's correct in that it's a much bigger deal. The Democrats can rally after if Trump were to beat, let's say, Biden in the next election, but I don't know if the Democrats can come back from a socialist as their primary victor going up in a national election. That's going to be, unless you think that then Bernie's movement is picked up by, I don't know, AOC. Play 15, producer Mark.
I think there's a couple of reasons. One, before people even knew who I was, like 5 minutes after I won my primary, it was the apocalypse on Fox News.
Yeah.
And
why?
I think it's because our political system is not designed for people like us. They're not designed for working people to succeed, for young people, for women, for people of color. It's not particularly welcoming. And historically, to have someone like that ascend, especially when I was running against someone who was the antithesis of those things.
To ascend so rapidly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's upending. But also I think it's because our entire political system revolves, frankly, around rich men. And rich men are not the center of my universe. Working families are.
So she is going to be the Democrat nominee at some point. I know this is now she's 30. You've got to be 35 to even under the Constitution run for president. But that I don't know. I guess she wouldn't be around for the next cycle, but she'll be in the next presidential cycle unless a Democrat win. Think about it this way: if a Democrat wins now in 2020, I think it's going to be AOC would certainly try after that Democrat has had his or her 8-year run to run for president. But if Trump wins re-election, which I certainly hope he does. AOC. Bernie will be. I think even Democrats would accept that in 4 more years, at age 82, Bernie would be too old. Look, I think Bloomberg is too old. I think Biden is too old. I don't understand why anyone pretends like that's not the case. These people are too old for the job. If Trump was 8, 9 years older than he is, I'd be like, I think Trump's getting up a little too old for the job too. I mean, he's just under the wire of what I think is feasible for age, but also, and I'm biased, of course, but I admit, unlike the fake news, I admit that I'm a Trump supporter and that I appreciate what the president is doing, and I am on board for and advocate for almost all of his agenda. I mean, really pretty much all the agenda. I think that Trump has an incredible energy and dynamism, and it's apparent all the time, and he never looks like Bernie looks like at any moment, he's just going to need a nap in a sippy cup. I mean, that's just the sense you get. Biden is like the old guy that everyone's trying to get him to take a nap, and he's yelling about how he's not tired yet. That's kind of what you get from Joe Biden. These guys are too old. AOC, Buttigieg, this is the future. This is the future of the Democratic Party. I also have to wonder if Buttigieg is going to leave Indiana and just decide he's going to run somewhere else. Because really the much safer play for him, or the much easier play for him down the line would be to go to a safe blue place, safe blue state, and become a congressman or run for Senate. I mean, look what Hillary Clinton did, right? Once you had that level of national recognition, Hillary just showed up in New York and became a senator from New York. Wasn't a New Yorker, never. But yeah, she just made it happen. I think you'll see that with Buttigieg because he's also going to, you're already seeing who the future of the Democratic Party is. So even if we defeat Bernie this time around, unless it is a crushing defeat. That's why I think that Bernie against Trump is probably a better thing for the country because we can see that and have the argument. If Bernie loses in the primary to, Biden or Bloomberg, you got to think that the supporters that Sanders have, they're just going to think that, and they did get screwed over by the DNC. That's a real thing. Once again, the media as well, not as supportive of Sanders as they are of other candidates. And so at that point, they'll just look for a new figure to rally around for Sandersism, to be a Sandernista. Sanders will become the Lenin, if you will, of the American socialist movement, and they'll be looking for Stalin. I mean, which, I would, not really Stalin. You get what I'm saying. I was just playing out that analogy there. Although I will talk to you later in the show about some troubling thoughts I have about wokeism and what our future really is as a country. I saw a very interesting piece on that one. Let's get to some of the other important moments, because I don't want to spend all day today on the debate. You didn't, if you watched it, you've already seen a lot of, or you already know some of what I'm going to be pointing out to you, and I think there are other things to talk about, including the Roger Stone verdict. I'm sorry. Sentencing. We already have the verdict, obviously. The sentencing of Roger Stone. The verdict on his sentence, you could say. Here is what I think was the single, the single moment that Mayor Pete had where he also went after Sanders and was somewhat memorable in that he's pointing out, like, guys, this person's a socialist. This is the Democratic Party. You got a socialist running for president who's winning right now. Play 3.
We could wake up 2 weeks from today, the day after Super Tuesday, and the only candidates left standing will be Bernie Sanders and Mike Bloomberg, the two most polarizing figures on this stage. And most Americans don't see where they fit if they've got to choose between a socialist who thinks that capitalism is the root of all evil and a billionaire who thinks that money ought to be the root of all power. Let's put forward somebody who actually lives and works in a middle-class neighborhood in an industrial Midwestern city. Let's put forward somebody who's actually a Democrat.
Actually a Democrat. That's a clear swipe at Bernie Sanders. And I think it should be a more effective one, except the Democratic Party really now is, whether they will admit it or not, whether they will accept it or not, the Democratic Party is increasingly a socialist party. That's where this is now. That's where their policies are directed. They are in the business of bringing socialism to the United States, and that's where I think Bloomberg's strongest points last night were just, you guys are crazy, right? You understand that. I mean, the Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg on policy. Buttigieg seems, he's very polished and former McKinsey consultant and all the rest. He seems like a guy that would be reasonable based on tone, based on policy. He's not even the least bit reasonable. And when he does his Pope Pete routine, I lose my mind. Bloomberg was trying to just yell this. I think he's trying to do the Democrat. He thinks he's doing the Democratic Party a huge favor. If anything, just by stopping Bernie Sanders from being the nominee. I do believe that if Biden, let's say, we're all kind of counting Biden out of this, and I've been counting him out all along, but I'll just say it is too early based on numbers and based on polling to say Biden's a no-go. There's no doubt in my mind that Bloomberg will put his cash behind a Biden candidacy to help defeat Trump. So you got to remember, that means that Biden's effectively going to be running with an unlimited checkbook. And Biden will be able to, the whole, all the time spent fundraising, everything else, it's going to change the whole game. So we have to take very seriously that Donald Trump is going to have some real competition here. It's going to be closer than maybe we had anticipated. And it's always going to be close because of the way the system currently is and the polarization in our politics. But Bloomberg is trying to warn them. You put a socialist up there, guys. It's not going to be good. Play 4.
I don't think there's any chance of the senator beating President Trump. You don't start out by saying, I've got 160 million people. I'm going to take away the insurance plan that they love. That's just not a ways that you go and start building the coalition that the Sanders camp thinks that they can do. I don't think there's any chance whatsoever. And if he goes and is the candidate, we will have Donald Trump for another 4 years.
I think he's probably right, but I know some very smart conservatives who would argue till they're blue in the face that Bernie Sanders is the only one who will really be able to defeat Donald Trump. Until you run the experiment, you don't know what the results are. I fall in the Bloomberg analysis here on that side. I think that he's correct, that Bernie Sanders gets crushed because Americans don't really want a socialist to be the president. And Bernie Sanders, much of the Democratic Party is premised on telling people things when you want them to vote for you and then not really believing those things or acting on those things the moment that the votes are cast and now they're in power. Democrats do a lot of head fakes. They do a lot of disingenuous, this is who we are outreach when it's really not who they are. A lot of the ways that they position different candidates, especially in states that are purple or where there's a large base of Republican voters, is to allow them to just be close enough to the mainstream that they can get away with at election time, and then all of a sudden they're in lockstep with Nancy Pelosi or in lockstep with Chuck Schumer on all legislative issues. That's that's a very common theme among the Democrats. Sanders dispenses with that. And he's like, no, I'm a socialist. Like, really? An actual capital SOCH? Speaking of having a difficult time with trivia and spelling and getting things right. I'm just kidding. Bernie Sanders obviously knows how to spell socialist. He is a socialist. He's probably got it tattooed somewhere on his arm or something. Senator Klobuchar to Buttigieg. This was it after Klobuchar forgot in an interview who the president of Mexico was. Please play 21.
But you're staking your candidacy on your Washington experience. You're on the committee that oversees border security. You're on the committee that does trade. You're literally in part of the committee that's overseeing these things. And we're not able to speak to literally the first thing about the politics of the country to ourselves.
Are you trying to say that I'm dumb, or are you mocking me here, Pete?
I'm saying that you shouldn't trivialize
I made
that
an error. People sometimes forget names. I am the one that has, number one, has the experience based on passing over 100 bills. If I could respond, this was a pretty big allegation. He's basically saying that I don't have the experience to be president of the United States. I have passed over 100 bills as the lead Democrat since being in the U.S. Senate. I am the one, not you, that has won statewide in congressional district after congressional district. And I will say, when you tried in Indiana, Pete, to run, what happened to you? You lost by over 20 points to someone who later lost to my friend Joe Donnelly. So don't tell me about experience.
The gloves came off. Both sides there, the gloves came off. I was surprised. Democrat debate made for good viewing.
I hope you heard what his defense was. I've been nice to some women. That just doesn't cut it. The mayor has to stand on his record. And what we need to know is exactly what's lurking out there. He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is that?
Let me finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told. And let me put, there's agreements between two parties that wanted to keep it quiet, and that's up to them. They signed those agreements, and we'll live with it.
So wait,
media is all over this. I know we got to this topic earlier in the hour, but I meant to play that soundbite for you and I skipped over. That was where she really went for it. You know, that was where Tomahawk went swinging. She decided that she was going to go after Bloomberg there, and he didn't sound particularly good at all in the defense. No question. She's like, people, they sign the agreements and. But let's also remember Bloomberg runs a huge company, and there's a lot of people that work in that company, and we know that he's made crude, crass jokes. We also know that Bernie Sanders wrote some bizarre stuff about women back in the day. I just don't know how much anyone's really going to care about this. The media cares about it tremendously, and they're viewing this as the huge Achilles heel that was exposed during the debate by Bloomberg, or during the debate when it comes to Bloomberg. I think that everyone will forget this one in a day or two, because that attack really only works on Republicans. With Mitt Romney and his binders full of women. And I don't think that it's as strong as the Democrat media likes to pretend it is, because they're also full of political correctness and wokeness and all the rest of it. I don't think they have a good gauge of what the damage is from that. But we'll see. We'll see. That was Bloomberg's worst moment, though. I wonder if that was when everybody was wondering if Mini Mike was going to scurry off stage left. So we'll see.